out, knots, rough texturing and so forth. I really like the looks of that texture. I think it really adds a nice element to the overall design. And it certainly could dress up a contemporary piece of furniture. Now I won't bore you with all the details of some of the other experiments over at the router, but I will show you the results of those experiments. Now the first movement away from this one was to try something, a larger scale version of this. Wider, but of course the same length, going top to bottom on the panel. Now you'll see two patterns on this one, so we'll first focus on just this checkering. Again, it's very large, but it really isn't detracting from the rest of the panel. So I think the design works out well, and it can be made large or small, wide or narrow in this case, but all around it just dresses up the panel and it gives it a very interesting texture. And I got to thinking, well, if the checkering worked out real well, what would just simple V-grooves look like? Just vertical V-grooves. Similar to our fluting pattern that we had earlier, but it just adds another level of crispness, a different type of detail, more intricate than the large flutes that we were doing. But all around, I think this design works very well, easily replicated at the router table or even with a handheld router in a straight edge. The checkering pattern, you certainly could do that on a router table, handheld router with a straight edge, but with all those cuts, I think you would be bored to death before you even finished it. With these out of the way, I got to thinking, well, let's look at another possibility. Elsewhere, we were working with a texture pattern using a ball peen hammer and some rounded over punches. And it gave us these nice dimples. And I got to thinking, well, here at the CNC router, what if we took a ball-nosed router bit, this one happens to be a 1/2-inch radius, and we created a pattern, a very structured pattern of these dimples. And this is what we came up with. A large panel with an awful lot of dimples in it. Once again, this is something you could do with a handheld router and an egg crate type fixture or jig that you would make that would allow you to position the router at each of these points. It would be a long, tedious process. I probably wouldn't want to do it with a handheld router, but nonetheless there is the ability to do it that way. Now the design, I think, is truthfully just too busy to be practical. However, on a contemporary piece of furniture that perhaps you're looking for an industrial look, it very well might work. Now these dimples are about 9/16 in diameter and they're spaced 7/8 of an inch apart. Just too busy for my eye, but nonetheless it gives a very interesting look. If you skipped every other one, it might actually look better. Now I got to thinking, well, this is all with one color, and of course the shadow lines create a very interesting effect again. But I wonder what would happen if we stained the wood first and then drilled all these little holes or divots. So this is what we came up with. I took the same piece of wood, obviously, stained it with a dark cherry stain first, a water-based stain, and then I let the program run exactly the same way. Now again, it's still a very, very busy design, and with this extra color in here, it even is more busy. It's just too much going on there. But it is a very interesting effect, and it is something that you probably won't see very frequently, but it is certainly something that may be incorporated into a future design. I would think with every other hole, though. Now this particular pattern is inspired by Japanese gardens. I'm sure you've seen them. It's a stone garden, and then they rake patterns into that stone, and it creates very interesting textures and patterns. It's very soothing to the eye. Now I would have never thought that this pattern was going to look this attractive, but it's really working for me. Now this particular version of it, I cut with that V-groove tool, a very pointy tool that's 45 degrees, or rather 90 degrees included angle. The very fine texturing inside, I didn't get as smooth of a cut as I wanted, and as it comes down to a point in the bottom, it's a little bit harsh. So I took the same program and same pattern or design and ran it with a rounded or a ball nose router bit, 1/4 inch diameter ball nose router bit, and it really softened up the look. Now I didn't do any sanding on this. This is straight off the router, But I think if I were to gently sand these sharp points over where they meet up at the top surface, it would look much, much better and even more pleasing to the eye. All around, I think it's an excellent treatment, and it could work on a variety of different pieces of furniture. So I may be keeping this one in mind for quite some time. Now this next pattern would be sort of Art Deco meets Japanese garden. Very simple design. It was done with that 1/4-inch diameter ball nose router bit. Nothing more than straight lines, blending into a curve, coming back up into a straight line. Very symmetrical pattern. This one doing with a handheld router could be a bit of a challenge because you'd have to make 6 different templates because of the different sized radii here as you progress out, but it could very easily be replicated with a handheld router. It's a very interesting design, adds a very strong element to the overall panel. Shadow lines are fantastic and they work differently. You can see up in this areas are dark, are light, diagonally opposite are light, and then are dark, so the shadow lines play against each other nicely. The pattern could easily be split. If we had 2 doors and we ran the stile down the center and split them, we could put this pattern on one door, this pattern on the other, and still maintain symmetry across 2 door panels. All around, a very attractive pattern again. Now again, I'd like to emphasize that the point of this issue of the magazine is to explore and experiment with things that you normally wouldn't do in your designs for a piece of furniture. And that's why I think it's so important to experiment with these different textures in that. You get an idea what's working, what isn't working, and what pleases your eye as the designer. Now, as I mentioned before, the CNC router is just another tool in the shop that you can use to your advantage. I just scratched the surface of some of the designs that I'd like to show you that we can do on the CNC router, but as with anything, you could use a variety of other tools. As I mentioned all along here, you could do each of these patterns with a handheld router and a template, but it'd just be a lot more work, a lot more repetition, and perhaps not as safe. Well, I hope you found this issue informative. The one thing I really hope you come away with is the courage to experiment, to explore, and to try some of your own ideas, even if it's just in an explorative situation such as this. If you can't afford to go out and buy some hardwood to cut up into panels to do experimentation with, pick up a sheet of 4x8 MDF. You can pick that stuff up for about $15 a sheet, and it's a great blank canvas for you to try and experiment with all those ideas that are rolling around inside your mind's eye. I'm Chris DeHut for Woodworking at Home magazine. I hope you enjoyed this issue.